lesson is on solving quadratic equations by completing. In the previous lesson, you solved quadratic equations by isolating x squared and then using square roots. This method works if the quadratic equation, when written in standard form, is a perfect square. When a trinomial is a perfect square, there's a relationship between the coefficient of the x term, the b term, and the constant term, the c term. If we had x squared plus 6x plus 9, or x squared minus 8x plus 16, and we divided the coefficient of the x term by 2, the b term, then square the result, we're going to get the constant term. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, squared is 9. 6 was the b term, 9 is the c term. And negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4, squared is 16. Negative 8 was the b term, and 16 is the c term. An expression in the form x squared plus bx is not a perfect square. However, you can use the relationship shown above to add a term to the x squared plus bx to form a trinomial that is a perfect square. This is called completing the square. To complete the square of x squared plus bx, you add b divided by 2 squared to the expression. This will form a perfect square trinomial. So if we had x squared plus 6x plus blank, and we're trying to find the number that would make this into a perfect square, we would divide the b term, which is 6, by 2, and then square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, squared is 9. So x squared plus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square trinomial. It can be factored into x plus 3 squared. Same thing if you had variables but no numbers in there. If you had x squared plus bx plus blank, and we're trying to form a perfect square, we would have x squared plus bx plus b divided by 2 squared. And when you factor that, you would end up with x plus b divided by 2 in parentheses squared. Complete the square to form a perfect square trinomial. For a, we have x squared plus 2x plus blank. We're going to identify b, which is 2. And in b, we had x squared minus 6x plus blank, and we identify b, which is negative 6. Then we find b divided by 2 squared. So for a, 2 divided by 2 is 1, squared equals 1. For b, negative 6 divided by 2 squared is 36/4 or 9. Now we're going to add the b divided by 2 squared to the expression. So for a it was 1, and for b it was 9. So for a we get x squared plus 2x plus 1 as our perfect square trinomial, and for b we get x squared minus 6x plus 9 as our perfect square trinomial. Complete the square to form a perfect square trinomial. A, x squared plus 12x plus blank, and b is x squared minus 5x plus blank. These are two for you to try, and then you can check back for the answers. We're going to identify b. For a it's 12, and for b it's negative 5. And then we're going to find b divided by 2 squared. So for a it was 12 divided by 2, which is 6, squared, which is 36. And for b it's negative 5 divided by 2 squared, which is 25/4. Now we're going to add b divided by 2 squared to the expression. So for a it was x squared plus 12x plus 36, and for b it was x squared minus 5x plus 25/4. To solve a quadratic equation in the form x squared plus bx equals c, first complete the square of x squared plus bx, then you can solve using square roots. Step 1, write the equation in the form x squared plus bx equals c. Step 2, find b divided by 2 squared. Step 3, complete the square by adding b divided by 2 squared to both sides of the equation. This is important that you remember to add it to both sides, not just the x squared plus bx side, but also to the right-hand side of the equation as well. Step 4, factor the perfect square trinomial. Step 5, take the roots of both sides. Step 6, write two equations, both using positive and negative square roots, to solve each equation. Solve by completing the square, check your answer. X squared plus 16x equals negative 15. So we're going to complete the square. The equation is already in the form x squared plus bx equals c. We're going to find half of b and then square it. So 16 divided by 2 is 8, squared is 64, and we're going to add that to both sides. So we get x squared plus 16x plus 64. We've created ourselves a perfect square trinomial on purpose. And then on the right-hand side, we have negative 15 plus 64. So we're going to factor and then simplify. On the left-hand side, our perfect square trinomial is x plus 8 squared. And on the right-hand side, we end up with 49. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides, just like we learned in the previous lesson. And we get 8x plus 8 equals plus or minus 7, which is the square root of 49. So we subtract 8 from both sides, We set it equal to positive 7 and negative 7, and we get negative 1 or negative 15. The solutions are negative 1 and negative 15. If we checked our answer and plugged negative 1 back into the equation, we would get negative 15 equals negative 15. And if we plugged negative 15 back into the equation, we would get negative 15 equals negative 15. So we know that we found our two zeros correctly. Solve by completing the square. Check your answer. X squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0. The negative 6 isn't helping us, so we need to move it to the other side so we can write it in the form x squared plus bx equals c. So we're going to add 6 to both sides, and that gives us x squared plus negative 4x equals 6. We're going to find b divided by 2 squared. So negative 4 is b, divided by 2 is negative 2, squared is 4. We're going to complete the square by adding 4 to both sides. That gives us x squared minus 4x plus 4 on the left-hand side, which forms a perfect square trinomial. That's what we're trying to do. We're doing it on purpose. Equals 6 plus 4. So we're going to factor and simplify. The x squared minus 4x plus 4 factors into x minus 2 squared, and the 6 plus 4 equals 10. We're going to take the square root of both sides, and we get x minus 2, because the square and the square root cancel, equal plus or minus the square root of 10. Now we're going to have to solve both the equations. We're going to set it equal to x minus 2 equal to positive square root 10 and negative square root 10, and then we're going to add 2 to both sides. So we get 2 plus square root 10 or 2 minus square root 10. Solve by completing the square. Check your answer. X squared plus 10x equals negative 9. This one's for you to try, and then you can check back for your answer. So the equation is already in the form of x squared plus bx equals c. So we're going to take 1/2 of b and then square it. So we're going to divide b by 2 and then square it. So we get 10 divided by 2 is 5, squared is 25. And we're going to complete the square by adding 25 to both sides. That gives us a perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side. X squared plus 10x plus 25 equals negative 9 plus 25. So we're going to factor and simplify. That factors into x plus 5 squared equals 16. We're going to take the square root of both sides, and we get x plus 5, because the square and the square root cancel, equals plus or minus 4, because that's the square root of 16. And we have to solve for both. We're getting x plus 5 equals positive 4, x plus 5 equals negative 4. And then solve by subtracting 5 from both sides, and we get negative 1 or negative 9. So if we're going to check our answer, we could plug in negative 1 to the original equation, and we get negative 9 equals negative 9, which is true. And we could plug negative 9 into the equation and get negative 9 equals negative 9, which is also true. So we know we found our zeros correct. Solve by completing the square. Check your answer. T squared minus 8t minus 5 equals 0. This one's for you to try, and then you can check back for your answer. So we need to write the equation in the form x squared plus bx equals c. We're going to add 5 to both sides, so we get t squared plus negative 8t equals 5. We're going to find b divided by 2 squared. So negative 8 is b, divided by 2 is negative 4, squared is 16. We're going to complete the square by adding that to both sides. So t squared minus 8t plus 16 equals 5 plus 16. On the left-hand side, we formed a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to factor and simplify. That gives us t minus 4 squared equals 21. And we're going to take the square root of both sides. That gives us t minus 4, because the square and the square root cancel, equal plus or minus the square root of 21. And then we solve both. We add 4 to both sides, and we get 4 plus square root 21, 4 minus square root 21. Solve by completing the square. Negative 3x squared plus 12x minus 15 equals 0. We're going to divide by negative 3 to make a equal to 1. So we're going to divide by negative 3 all of the terms, and we're going to write in the form x squared plus bx equals c. So we end up with x squared, which was what we were trying to do, 1x squared, minus 4x, because 12 divided by negative 3 is negative 4, plus 5, because negative 15 divided by negative 3 is positive 5, equals 0, because 0 divided by negative 3 was 0. Now we're going to move the 5 to the other side by subtracting it from both sides, and that gives us x squared minus 4x equals negative 5. Now we're going to find b divided by 2 squared. So b is negative 4, divided by 2 is negative 2, squared is 4, and we're going to complete the square by adding that to both sides. So we get x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals negative 5 plus 4. We formed a perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side on purpose, and then we have to add to the other side as well. Now we're going to factor and simplify, so it becomes x minus 2 squared equals negative 1. When you take the square root, there are no real numbers whose square is negative, so there are no real solutions for this. Solve by completing the square. 5x squared plus 19x equals 4. Step 1, we have to divide by 5 to make a equal to 1. So we divide all of the terms by 5, and that gives us x squared plus 19 fifths x equals 4/5. So we've written it in the form x squared plus bx plus equals c. And now b is 19/5. We have to divide by 2 and then square it. So 19/5 divided by 2 is like saying times 1/2. So if you think of it as 19/5 divided by the actual divided by symbol, 2/1, you have to flip the second fraction and change it to multiplication. So it would be like 19/5 times 1/2, which is 19/10, and then squared is 361/100. To complete the square, we're going to add 361/100 to both sides. So on the left-hand side, we've created a perfect square trinomial, and on the right-hand side, we're going to have to find a common denominator, which is 100. So we get 80/100 plus 361/100. We're going to factor and simplify. On the left-hand side, we get x plus 19/10 squared equals 441/100. And we're going to take the square root of both sides, and that gives us x plus 19/10 because when we take the square root, the square and the square root cancel. And then we're going to take the square root of the top and the bottom. So we get plus or minus 21 because that's the square root of 441, and divided by 10 because that's the square root of 100. Now we're going to write the two equations and solve. So we get x plus 19/10 equals positive 21/10, or x plus 19/10 equals negative 21/10. And so we get x equals 1/5 or x equals negative 4. The solutions are 1/5 and negative 4. Solve by completing the square. 3x squared minus 5x minus 2. This one's for you to try, and then you can check back for your answer. So the first thing we're going to do is divide by 3 to make a equal to 1. So we're dividing all terms by 3, and we get x squared minus 5/3 x minus 2/3 equals 0. We're going to write in the form x squared plus bx equals c. So we're going to add 2/3 to both sides, giving us x squared minus 5/3 x equals 2/3. B is negative 5/3. So we're going to find b divided by 2 squared. If it's a fraction, remember, it's like multiplying to the flip of it. So it'd be negative 5/3 times 1/2 instead of 2/1, instead of divided by 2/1 squared. And so that would give us 25/36. Now we're going to complete the square by adding 25/36 to both sides. So we get x squared minus 5/3 x plus 25/36. And then on the right-hand side, we get 2/3 plus 25/36. So we have to find common denominators in order to combine them. So that becomes 2/3 becomes 24/36, and we're going to add it to 25/36. And then on the left-hand side, we have a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to factor and then simplify. We get x minus 5/6 in parentheses squared equals 49/36. We take the square root of both sides. X minus 5/6 equals plus or minus 7/6. So the square root of 49 was 7, and the square root of 36 was 6. We have to write and solve the two equations. X minus 5/6 equals positive 7/6, or x minus 5/6 equals negative 7/6. So then we add 5/6 to both sides, and we get 2 or negative 1/3. So the solutions are 2 or negative 1/3. Solve by completing the square. 4t squared minus 4t plus 9 equals 0. This one's for you to try, and then you can check back for your answer. So we're going to divide by 4 to make a equal to 1. So we divide all terms by 4, and that gives us t squared minus t plus 9/4 equals 0. We need to write in the form x squared plus bx equals c, so we're going to subtract 9/4 from both sides, and we get t squared minus t equals negative 9/4. So we get t squared plus negative 1t equals negative 9/4. B is negative 1. So we're going to divide by 2 and then square, or times by 1/2 and then square. So we get negative 1/2 squared is 1/4. We're going to add that to both sides to complete the square. So we get t squared minus 1 plus 1/4, and that's going to form a perfect square trinomial. And then on the right-hand side, we get negative 9/4 plus 1/4. So when we combine negative 9/4 and 1/4, we get negative 8/4. Now we're going to factor and simplify. On the left-hand side, we have t minus 1/2 squared, and on the right-hand side, negative 8/4 becomes negative 2. When we take the square root of both sides, we're trying to take the square root of negative 2, and there are no real numbers whose square is negative, so there are no real solutions. A rectangular room has an area of 195 square feet. Its width is 2 feet shorter than its length, so that would be x minus 2. Find the dimensions of the room, round to the nearest hundredth of a foot if necessary. So first, to understand the problem, the answer will be the length and width of the room. Important information, the room area is 195 square feet. The width is 2 feet less than the length. The plan is to set the formula for the area of a rectangle equal to 195, which is the area of the room, and then solve the equation. So we're going to have x be the width, and then x plus 2 is the length. We're going to use the formula length times width equals area. So the length times the width is the area of the room. So x plus 2 is the length times the width, which is x, equals 195, the area of the room. So we're going to simplify. We're going to use completing the square. We're going to find 1/2 of b, which is 2. So 1 squared is 1. We're going to add that to both sides. So we get x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 195 plus 1. We're going to factor. On the left-hand side, we have a perfect square trinomial. X plus 1 squared equals 196. We're going to take the square root of both sides, and we get x plus 1 equals plus or minus 14. So we're going to write two equations and solve. X plus 1 equals positive 14, or x plus 1 equals negative 14. So we get 13 or negative 15. Negative numbers are not reasonable for length, so x equals 13 is the only solution that makes sense. The width is 13 feet, so the length is 13 plus 2, or 15 feet. If you look back, the length of the room is 2 feet greater than the width, so also 13 times 15 equals 195. That's how you know your answer makes sense. An architect designs a rectangular room with an area of 400 feet squared. The length is to be 8 feet longer than the width. Find the dimensions of the room. Round your answers to the nearest tenth of a foot. This one's for you to try, and then you can check back for your answer. So to understand the problem, the answer is going to be the length and width of the room. Important information, the room area is 400 square feet, and the length is 8 feet more than the width. The plan is to set the formula for the area of a rectangle equal to 400, which is the area of the room, and then solve the equation. We're going to have x be the width, and then x plus 8 be the length. So we're going to use the formula for the area of a rectangle, length times width equals area. So we're going to have x plus 8, which is our length, times x, which is our width, equals 400, which is the area of the room. So simplified, we have x squared plus 8x equals 400. Now we're going to find half of b and then square it, or b divided by 2 and then square it. So we get 8 divided by 2, which is 4 squared is 16. That's what we're going to add to both sides to complete the square. So we have x squared plus 8x plus 16. That's our perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side, and 400 plus 16 on the right-hand side. So when we factor, we get x plus 4 squared equals 416. We're going to take the square root of both sides. So we get x plus 4 equals approximately plus or minus 20.4, since 416 does not have a perfect square. Now we're going to write two equations and solve. So we have x plus 4 is approximately equal to 20.4, or x plus 4 is approximately equal to negative 20.4. And then we'll subtract 4 from both sides, and we get 16.4 or negative 20. Negative numbers don't make sense for length, so x equals 16.4 is the only solution that makes sense. Remember, they asked you to round to the nearest tenth. So the width is approximately 16.4 feet. The length is 16.4 plus 8, so that would be approximately 24.4 feet. The length of the room is 8 feet longer than the width, and also 16.4 times 24.4 is 400.16, which is approximately 400, so you know that's why your answer makes sense.